Contrast. Episode 3. Crossing. In the previous episode, Viktor suffers the consequences of his irreversible act, and together with Kateryna, they had to fight with all their strength to survive, while being relentlessly pursued by Russian troops. After facing brutal cold traps and deadly traps, they found temporary refuge, but realized that freedom was still a long way off. Now, cornered, they will need to accept a dangerous deal to follow their plan. In this episode, Viktor and Kateryna find themselves faced with new enigmatic enemies and even more complex dilemmas. Now trapped, they will need to accept a dubious deal with dangerous underworld figures to cross safely and reach freedom, putting their lives at risk once again. Each step could be fatal, and your choices could mean hope or a new threat. Stay until the end of this episode and find out if Viktor and Kateryna will succeed in this risky journey, or if they will fall once again into the traps of those who control destiny from the shadows. Viktor and Kateryna's situation is tense. At a certain moment from the middle of the group, a tall man with a hard expression appeared, pushing the others away with a simple gesture. His eyes were cold and assessed Viktor with precision, trying to decipher every detail of his posture. He wore heavy clothing, a mix of military gear and improvised accessories, suggesting he was not part of a conventional army. The gun hung from his shoulder, but his confidence showed that he didn't need it to command respect. He stopped in front of Viktor, staring at him in silence for long seconds, evaluating each possible scenario before making his next decision. The group leader's eyes analyzed Viktor with calculated coldness. The silence stretched for seconds that seemed like an eternity. The men around kept their weapons pointed, ready for any unexpected reaction. Viktor knew he needed to act quickly before these strangers decided it was safer to eliminate them. With a slow and calculated movement, he raised his hands, showing that he was unarmed. Kateryna, still immobilized, gave him an apprehensive look, hoping he had a plan. The leader took a step forward, his eyes dark and hard, waiting for Viktor to say something that would justify his presence there. He chose his words carefully, knowing that any slip-up could be fatal. With a firm voice but in a low tone so as not to appear dangerous, Viktor explained that they were fleeing from the Russian army, that they were not a threat to anyone, and that they just wanted a safe place. He talked about the refugees, the risks they took, and even the relentless persecution they suffered from the moment they decided to challenge the system. He did not mention details about his military identity, as he knew that any mention of the past could make the situation worse. The leader kept his expression closed, exchanging quick glances with the other men around. They didn't seem convinced, but they also didn't immediately take action against the two. The biting wind was blowing strong, and Viktor realized that that group was on the move, perhaps running away from something too. Perhaps there was a chance for negotiation, but first that barrier of mistrust would need to be broken. Finally, the leader gave a signal and the men loosened the tension on their weapons a little, but without lowering them completely. One of them approached Viktor and searched his coat, looking for something that could contradict his story. He only found the few supplies they had and a small blade, which did not represent a real threat in the face of so many rifles. The man stepped back and exchanged a few low words with the leader, who finally looked at Viktor and Kateryna with an unreadable expression. They might have had a chance, but nothing indicated they were safe. Viktor knew they were still treading on thin ice, and any false step could cost them both their lives. Viktor maintained a firm and controlled posture, choosing each word carefully. He knew the art of negotiation well and knew that at that moment, his only chance was to convince the group leader that they were not a threat. He explained that they did not belong to any army, that they were just fleeing and that they could be useful. He spoke of his skills, the information he had about Russian troops and how they could help that group protect itself or even expand its territory. The leader listened to him in silence, studying every nuance of his speech. After a tense moment of silence, he finally signaled for them to lower their weapons completely, making it clear that for now, the two would be spared. But something in his eyes indicated that he didn't do anything without a reason. Kateryna watched everything cautiously, feeling that something wasn't right. The decision to accept them seemed too quick, almost rehearsed. The other men around didn't show the expected relief, just cold, assessing looks. Viktor knew they were being tested, that any mistake could be fatal. They followed the group, trying to decipher their true intentions. As they walked, they realized that this group was more organized than they seemed at first glance. Improvised but efficient weaponry, movement strategies that indicated training. They weren't just survivors trying to escape the war, they were something more. As they advanced, distrust grew. Viktor noticed whispers among the group members, glances exchanged that indicated that a plan was already underway even before his arrival. The leader took them to a more distant point where an improvised camp was set up. There were supplies, ammunition, and even vehicles hidden under tarps. This was not a simple refuge. It was a strategic point, a place where something bigger was being planned. Viktor and Kateryna were faced with a dangerous choice. It was clear that they had been spared for a reason, and it wouldn't take long for them to find out what it was. The problem was that now, retreating was no longer an option. They were escorted to an underground hideout, a hidden location amid the ruins of an abandoned building. The air was thick and smelled of oil and rust. Stacks of boxes were stacked against the walls, some marked with symbols that Viktor recognized as belonging to the black market. In the center of the dimly lit space, a short, stout man was waiting for them, calmly smoking a cigarette. His small, attentive eyes coldly analyzed them, like mere goods, ready for a transaction. The leader of the group introduced them to the man with few words, and it soon became clear that this smuggler did nothing without demanding something in return. He promised to take them to the border, but not for free. The price was high, more than anything they could pay. The smuggler sat back against a table full of maps and dismantled weapons and explained that there was another way to pay. They would need to transport a load to an unspecified destination. The tone of voice made it clear that there was no room for negotiation. Kateryna felt a shiver run down her spine because she knew that accepting that meant getting involved with something as dangerous as the war they were fleeing. Viktor kept his expression impassive, analyzing the situation. They had no options. Refusing meant losing the only chance to escape. He asked what the cargo was, but only received an enigmatic look in response. The man stubbed out his cigarette and said they would know when the time was right. With no choice, Viktor accepted the deal, but knew they needed to find a way to not get stuck in that game. He and Kateryna spent the next few hours gathering information, observing the other men, and trying to understand who they were dealing with. Viktor used his manipulation skills to extract valuable details, pretending to be more interested in the work than he really was. Kateryna, in turn, realized that not everyone there was loyal to the smuggler, which could be an opening for them to escape without fulfilling the deal. They were taken to an area further away from the hideout, where an aged truck was waiting for them. Its engine was still running, giving off a strong smell of burnt diesel. The vehicle looked ready to leave at any moment, with packages strapped to the bed and wooden boxes stacked in the cargo compartment. No armed convoys, no escort groups, just a lone driver. A silent, hard-faced man who glanced at them before turning to the cab without saying a word. The smuggler gestured for them to go up. The decision to get into the truck was not a choice, but an imposition. The smuggler, a man with cold eyes and a voice full of contempt, made it clear that there were no alternatives. The proposal was simple on the surface, but it carried dangerous implications. Viktor and Kateryna would be part of an important delivery, something that would supposedly guarantee the group's trust and consequently, their survival. However, there were no details about their final destination or what exactly they were transporting. Only one instruction was given sternly before departure. They could not be seen on the route. They should remain hidden in the back of the truck and only reveal themselves to the people who would be waiting for them at their final destination. Time seemed to be running against them, and questioning anything at that moment would be pointless. With no alternative, Viktor and Kateryna climbed into the back of the truck, feeling the metal door slam shut behind them. Darkness and the strong smell of oil and metal enveloped them. Kateryna ran her fingers over the rough surface of one of the boxes, trying to decipher its contents by touch alone. Viktor, in turn, remained close to the exit, paying attention to external sounds. The engine growled louder and the vehicle began to move, shaking slightly as it gained speed. The voices outside gradually faded away, replaced by the monotonous noise of tires tearing up the road. Something was wrong. If the cargo was so important, why would a simple driver accompany them? Why weren't there more men to escort them? And why wasn't anyone following up with them to make sure they kept their end of the bargain? Questions pounded in Viktor's mind as he observed every detail around him, looking for any clue that would reveal what they were really transporting. The truck rocked as it crossed potholed roads, its engine growling low in the silent dawn. Viktor and Kateryna were in the cargo hold, surrounded by sealed wooden boxes and tightly strapped canvas packages. The smell of rust and oil permeated the air, making breathing heavy. The driver hasn't exchanged a single word since they left hiding. Kateryna remained alert, feeling the weight of imminent danger. They were being used, but without knowing exactly what for. The road became even more uneven, and the truck slowed down. Voices came up ahead, drowned out by the roar of the engine. Viktor sneaked into a small gap between the boxes and managed to see in the distance a military blockade. Armed soldiers searched vehicles, checking documents and inspecting every corner of the cargo transported. Kateryna's heart skipped a beat when she heard the first shouts of command. The driver let out a heavy sigh but continued driving, trying to remain calm. They were completely defenseless. If they were discovered, they would have nowhere to run. Viktor evaluated the options. They couldn't jump on the move without getting hurt, nor could they simply hide and hope the inspection was superficial. They had to act quickly, before it was too late. The truck stopped with a jolt. Heavy footsteps echoed outside. The tarpaulin that covered the body was pulled and the light of flashlights invaded the dark space. Viktor and Kateryna held their breath as the soldiers began to search the cargo. One of the men hit one of the boxes hard, testing its resistance. For a moment, Viktor thought they would be discovered, but the driver intervened, claiming to be in a hurry to deliver the goods. The soldier, however, crossed his arms and looked at the driver, expecting something that Viktor soon understood: bribe. It should already be a custom at that checkpoint. The driver, without hesitation, pulled a crumpled envelope from his jacket pocket and discreetly handed it to the man. The soldier quickly checked and signaled to the others, opening the way. The tension was suffocating. Any slip-up and they would be killed or arrested. Time seemed to drag by until finally, after long minutes of inspection, the soldiers stopped the search and authorized passage. The truck started moving again, and Viktor realized that the driver was already prepared for this type of situation. But that wasn't a good sign. If even the crossing was treated as a clandestine scheme, what were they really transporting? Whatever it was, discovering the truth could be as dangerous as being captured. Viktor kept his eyes open for the slightest movement around him, but the long and monotonous journey ended up creating a space where the silence seemed too heavy. Kateryna, hugging her knees, looked into the darkness between the cracks of the truck. It was she who broke the silence first, talking about the places she always wanted to see, about what she expected from life before the war. He spoke of a house in a small town, of sunny days and a future where he would no longer need to run away. Viktor listened to her without interrupting, feeling something different. All his life he was trained to survive, never to dream. That conversation, so simple, seemed like a strange remnant of normality amidst the chaos. Kateryna's eyes lit up for a moment as she described the childhood she once had, before everything fell apart. He spoke of the music his mother listened to while she cooked and the smell of fresh bread that filled the house on cold mornings. She spoke about her desire to study medicine, to help people, and laughed when remembering that she was always afraid of blood. Viktor, who always believed that the past was nothing more than a burden, realized that he liked hearing that soft voice bringing back memories that weren't his, but that somehow started to make sense. For a moment, he wished things were different, that the war hadn't taken away so many possibilities. He didn't say anything, but he felt the weight of that thought grow inside him. The truck jolted as it went over a hole in the road, bringing them back to reality. The unexpected approach made the two look at each other for a second longer than they should have. Kateryna looked away, but Viktor noticed that something had changed. The distrust that marked the beginning of that journey was being replaced by something new, something he couldn't name, but that made him desire a different destination. However, none of them could forget that they were in danger. At any moment, they could be captured or betrayed. The world outside that body gave them no room for feelings, but even so, something inside continued to grow, silent and inevitable. The truck came to a screeching halt, jolting Viktor and Kateryna in the back. The driver got out without saying anything, and for a few moments, silence reigned. Then heavy footsteps approached and the sound of harsh voices echoed outside. The air inside the body grew heavier, charged with the feeling that something was wrong. Viktor exchanged a quick glance with Kateryna, his military instinct already warning of imminent danger. The door was opened abruptly, and armed men appeared, their cold expressions making it clear that they were not there for a simple delivery. One of them made a gesture, and without delay, both were pulled out at gunpoint. It didn't take long for them to realize that they had been betrayed. The smugglers group had handed them over to local militiamen as part of some shady deal. Viktor was pushed against the dirt floor, feeling the barrel of a rifle pressing into his back. Kateryna was forcibly separated from him, held by two men who watched her with dangerous interest. The tension between the militiamen and the driver was evident, and Viktor realized that there was still a chance. They weren't completely on the same page, each trying to maintain control over the situation. As Viktor lay on the ground, his mind evaluated the possibilities within seconds. His eyes scanned the place and found something that could change the game in his favor. On the other side of the camp, not far away, next to an improvised structure, there were gallons of fuel piled up. His time was short, so he acted at the right time. He waited for a moment of distraction in the discussion between the militiamen, and with a quick and precise movement, he turned his body and grabbed the arm of the man who was holding him at gunpoint, twisting it violently. He managed to take the gun out of his hands in one dry blow. Before the others could react, still on the ground, he pulled the trigger and hit the militiaman in the chest, who fell lifeless. Without hesitation, he turned his sights to the gallons and fired. The first shot leaked a jet of fuel, and the second, upon finding a spark, caused a violent explosion that lit up the night with an orange flash. The impact knocked several men down and spread chaos among the militiamen. Confusion took over the place. Some ran for shelter while others tried to understand what was happening. Viktor grabbed Kateryna by the arm and ran with her towards the woods, using the smoke and fire as cover. The screams mixed with the crackling flames and the shots that came from all directions showed that there were no more alliances there, just disorder and survival. One of the militiamen tried to shoot them, but a secondary explosion, caused by the still burning fuel, threw him back. Without looking back, Viktor and Kateryna disappeared into the trees, knowing the chase would soon begin. They had managed to escape, but the night was still far from over. They needed to keep running if they wanted to survive. The walk through the forest was long and exhausting. Viktor and Kateryna's bodies were already showing signs of wear. The cold was relentless, and each gust of wind seemed to steal even more of his energy. The road they were following gradually disappeared, covered by accumulated snow, making each step a greater challenge. Viktor kept an eye out for any sign of shelter, anything that could offer minimal protection for them to regain their strength. It was then that in the distance, among the dark trees, he noticed a thread of smoke rising into the sky, a sign that someone was there, a home, a chance. They approached cautiously, observing every detail of the small wooden house. It didn't look like a trap, just a simple place, away from the road, a family home that resisted the chaos of war. Breathing heavily, Viktor knocked on the door, hoping that hope wouldn't become just another threat. For a few moments, silence reigned. Viktor kept an eye out for any movement inside the house, while Kateryna looked around, trying to identify possible exits if they needed to escape. Time seemed to lengthen, until the discreet sound of a lock being slid echoed in the freezing air. The door creaked open, revealing an elderly man, wrapped in a thick coat, his gaze assessing them warily. Viktor noticed that he wasn't holding any weapon, just an expression of someone who had seen too much to be frightened by strangers. The cold wind blew into the house, and for a brief moment, the man looked at Kateryna, then at Viktor, and finally stepped aside, signaling them to enter without saying a single word. The small wooden house was set back from the main road, surrounded by tall trees that protected it from the biting wind. The man who welcomed them was a man of few words, but his look showed that he understood the weight of war on those who were at his door. His wife, a woman with a kind expression, brought them blankets, clean clothes, and hot soup, while the children watched them from afar, curious and suspicious. Viktor thanked him with a discreet wave, knowing that this temporary shelter could be his only chance to reorganize his next steps. As they settled into the small room at the back of the house, the feeling of the hot water still remained on their skin, bringing a relief they hadn't felt in a long time. The shower had not just been a way to clean themselves of accumulated dust and sweat, but a rare moment of recovery, where they could feel, for a brief moment, that they were just two people trying to start over. Steam still hung in the air, and Viktor's tense muscles relaxed a little as he changed into dry clothes, feeling the weight of his tiredness eased. Kateryna, sitting on the edge of the small mattress, massaged her own shoulders, trying to relieve the accumulated tension. Viktor felt under the dirty clothes he was wearing earlier, feeling the cold surface of the object he had kept hidden throughout his escape. His cell phone was still there, intact, protected against the humidity and the searches it had been subjected to. This was his connection to the world he had left behind, a world that could now save him. Sitting on the edge of the mattress, Viktor took a deep breath, handling the device carefully. He turned it on without hesitation. The screen blinked weakly, revealing that the battery still had a minimum charge, enough for quick contact. Without wasting time, he accessed the secure line that only he and his right-hand man knew. The connection took a few seconds, enough time for Viktor to reflect on what he was about to do. It wasn't just a phone call. It was a return to the network of influence he had built with years of strategy and power. It was an affirmation that no matter how much he had tried to disappear, there was still a game to be played. When the call was finally answered, a firm voice sounded on the call. No greeting, no unnecessary questions, just a name said dryly and a password that confirmed that the channel was secure. Viktor responded with the same precision and, without wasting time, explained his situation. He didn't ask for help. He ordered the operation. On the other end of the line, his right arm immediately understood the gravity of what was happening. Within minutes, the first contacts were activated and the gears began to move. Viktor knew he had little time before his enemies realized his location, and he would need to act quickly. He put away his cell phone, took a charger he had in his room, put the cell phone on charge with the certainty that it would not be tracked, as he had used his secure line, and looked at Kateryna, who was watching everything carefully. She didn't ask, but her look said it all. For the first time, she saw the man Viktor really was, not just a soldier on the run, but someone with influence, someone who didn't accept being hunted. Now, the escape took a new direction. Sometime later, Viktor watched the cell phone screen light up brightly this time when he finally managed to recharge the battery. The cold glow of the device contrasted with the darkness around him as he waited for his advisor to contact him again. Kateryna went to the living room of the house and Viktor followed her. Kateryna sat by the fireplace, absorbing the remaining heat from the fading embers. The master of the house remained distant, just observing, while his wife prepared a simple meal. The phone vibrated discreetly, and when Viktor answered it, he heard the tense voice of his right-hand man in Russia. The words came quick and direct. The government was after him, ransacking his offices for any clue that might reveal his location. It was confirmation of what he already suspected. The government would now come after him. He took a deep breath and said only what was necessary. The escape plan was already underway, now with the support of his advisor. The response was immediate. His advisor had already activated the necessary contacts to provide documents and a safe escape route. They were supposed to meet a former border agent at a meeting point at Poland's airport, in an area for a booked flight. It would provide new identities and access to a ticket to the United States. These falsified documents were essential for them to be able to board the flight without arousing suspicion. With immigration systems keeping tabs on their true identities, traveling with original documents was impossible, but the contact in Poland would also arrange copies of the real documents, which would be delivered along with the fake ones. This way, as soon as they landed on American soil, they could discard the forged papers and assume their true identities without attracting the attention of the authorities. The exchange would have to be precise, with no room for error, as any inconsistency could result in immediate deportation or worse, imprisonment. The advisor warns that the path to the airport would still be difficult. They would need to cross a river that was controlled by mercenaries. But he already had the right contacts and would make a transaction to pay for the trip as soon as Viktor arrived at the ferry location. With all the instructions in hand, Viktor and Kateryna saw that it was time to move on to another stage of their survival challenge. Before leaving, Viktor asked to take a cell phone charger that he was using. The family didn't ask any questions. They just helped them as much as they could. The man of the house gave them a rudimentary map of the region, pointing out the least monitored routes to the ferry. Kateryna thanked him with a sincere look, but Viktor was focused on what came next. They said goodbye quickly and left later that night, moving cautiously through the surrounding forest. The cold punished their bodies, but the adrenaline kept them moving. The plan was underway, but any failure could mean the end of the line. The meeting point in Poland was the only chance to escape, and nothing could go wrong. But there was still a long and dangerous journey ahead. The night shrouded the forest in a thick blanket of fog, making it difficult to see much further. Viktor and Kateryna followed the map's instructions cautiously, keeping an eye out for any suspicious movement. The sound of running water could now be heard and mixed with the crunching that the leaves made when walking on them, making the environment even more tense. When they arrived at the ferry meeting point, they saw a group of armed men, all with impassive expressions, waiting next to a precarious boat. Viktor stepped forward, raising his hand slightly to demonstrate that he was not a threat. He mentioned the name of the contact who had made the deal, and then discreetly notified his advisor that they were on site. Within a few seconds, the transaction was confirmed. A significant amount of cryptocurrency was transferred to the mercenaries' account, sealing the deal. They received half payment, which would be completed once they completed the journey, and Viktor was in a safe place. The group leader gave a signal and one of the men raised his hand, indicating that they could board. Without hesitation, Viktor and Kateryna charged forward, climbing onto the weathered wooden raft. The structure creaked under their weight but held firm. The engine was started, and the vessel began to slide slowly down the dark river. They were on their way, knowing the crossing was far from safe. That was just part of the journey that would take them to the airport, where they would use the false documents to board the flight that would finally take them out of the danger zone. As the ferry pulled away from shore, the silence was broken by the muffled sound of a rapidly approaching engine. A second vessel appeared from the shadows, carrying armed men who did not appear to be there by chance. The pilot of Viktor and Kateryna's ferry tried to speed up, but it was too late. Shots ripped through the air, ricocheting off the wood of the boat and sending water splashing around. Viktor pulled Kateryna down, protecting her behind some boxes that served as cover. Time seemed to slow down as the mercenaries who had secured their crossing drew their weapons and responded to the attack. Amidst the chaos, Viktor felt a sudden impact on his leg. The heat of pain spread through the muscle, but he kept his expression steady, focused on surviving. The rival boat tried to get even closer, forcing a direct confrontation. Even though he was injured, Viktor stood up, supporting himself on the edge of the raft. With controlled breathing, he pointed a gun he found nearby and shot one of the attackers who was trying to climb aboard. The man fell into the river and the others hesitated for a moment. The mercenaries on Viktor's side took advantage of the distraction and opened fire, hitting another of the men on the enemy vessel. The ferry rocked violently when a sudden explosion caused the second vessel to lose control. One of the mercenaries had shot directly at the rival boat's fuel tank, creating a ball of fire that lit up the darkness of the crossing. The enemy was defeated, but the damage had already been done. Viktor staggered, feeling warm blood running down his leg, while Kateryna came to his side, catching him before he lost his balance. With no time to mourn, Kateryna took the lead. She assessed the situation quickly and leaned on the mercenaries to ensure the journey would continue without interruption. Her gaze was determined, unlike the hesitant woman who once needed Viktor's leadership. Now she was the one keeping everything under control, keeping the men focused on the objective. With shaking hands, he pressed a piece of cloth against Viktor's wound, stopping the bleeding as much as he could. He, despite the pain, observed the strength that emerged in her, recognizing that their survival depended more on her than on him at that moment. The ferry continued on its way, leaving behind the smoke from the explosion and the debris from the failed attack. As soon as the ferry pulled up to the bank, a black car was already waiting for them, its low beams illuminating the narrow dirt path. The driver, a man with hard features and few words, opened the back door without saying anything, signaling that they should get in quickly. Kateryna helped Viktor lean on her as she led him into the vehicle. The wound on his leg was getting worse and he needed urgent care, but stopping was not an option. As the car drove towards the border, Viktor kept his cell phone in hand, informing his advisor about each step. On the other end of the line, the man was already arranging everything, from medical contacts to resources for arrival at the airport. The route was long, and with each kilometer, the weight of wear became more evident. After hours of travel and countless barriers avoided, they reached a safe point on the Polish border. It was a remote house, used by smugglers and corrupt agents to discreetly cross people. Viktor was pale, his breathing was shallower, and Kateryna knew they couldn't continue like that. The contact who was waiting for them there offered an improvised place for Viktor to receive care. A doctor quickly stitched the wound and applied a coagulant, as well as other substances that ensured he could continue his journey. Meanwhile, Viktor took the moment to communicate with his advisor. He confirmed that they had managed to get to the agreed point and that they needed tickets for the next flight. His advisor confirmed that everything had already been arranged and that the plane would wait for them on the tarmac, without bureaucracy. As Viktor rested in one of the simple chairs in the hideout, he felt a different weight on his chest. It wasn't pain, nor the exhaustion of escaping, but something I didn't know exactly how to name. Kateryna was nearby, organizing documents and checking itinerary details. He watched in silence, noticing her small gestures, the way she frowned as she concentrated and the careful way she folded the map after analyzing it. Everything around seemed suspended for an instant. The tension, the escape, and the dangers they faced seemed distant. There, at that moment, he realized that his greatest wealth was not in the contacts he cultivated, the resources he possessed, or the influence he had. It was her, the only thing that made it all worth it at that moment. Kateryna noticed Viktor's gaze, and for an instant she felt a shiver run through her body. She held the paper she was analyzing, but her attention was now on him. Something had changed in Viktor's face, something she had never seen before. He didn't seem like the cold, strategic man he met at the beginning of the journey. There was a tiredness there, but also a surrender. Without saying anything, Kateryna walked over, sitting next to him. They didn't need words. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. On the contrary, it was a confirmation of what they both already knew but still didn't have the courage to admit. She rested her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes for a moment. For the first time, they weren't running away. The moment was interrupted by the sound of an alert on Viktor's cell phone. He picked up the device, quickly returning to reality. The message from his advisor informed him that everything was ready for the next step. The documents were confirmed, and security at the Polish border was adjusted so that they could pass through without problems. The tranquility of that moment was replaced by the need to continue. Viktor put away his phone and looked at Kateryna one last time before standing up. They didn't have much time to enjoy this break, but something inside him had changed. Now, moving forward was not just a matter of survival, it was building a future that, for the first time, he really wanted. With the final transfer made and payments arranged, Viktor and Kateryna headed to the airport. The car carrying them crossed secondary roads to avoid any checkpoints. With each minute, the tension grew. Viktor closed his eyes for a few moments, feeling tiredness taking over his body, but he always woke up at the slightest strange movement. When they finally arrived at the private terminal where the plane was waiting, Kateryna held his hand firmly. They had crossed an almost impossible path, but now they were about to leave. The advisor confirmed that everything was ready. Viktor, even weak, took a deep breath before getting out of the car. The last step separated them from a new life. As they walked toward the plane, the tension in the air was palpable. Viktor held Kateryna close, feeling his own body still weakened but ready to continue until the end. The private jet waited with its engines already on, the pilot impatient with the risk of exposure. Everything seemed to go according to plan until in the distance, the headlights of two cars approached quickly. They hurried to prepare, not knowing exactly what those cars were. Getting closer, Viktor identified that those cars belonged to the Russian government. Almost at the same time as the first shots ripped through the silence, ricocheting off the plane's bodywork and the asphalt of the runway. The mercenaries escorting them returned the attack, but time was against them. The pilot, realizing the imminent danger, signaled them to come aboard immediately. Viktor grabbed Kateryna by the wrist and started to run, but the weight of his own body, still suffering from the injury, turned each step into a gigantic effort. In the middle of the race, a nearby crash made Kateryna lose her balance. The hard floor of the track greeted her brutally, eliciting a groan of pain. Viktor stopped for a second, his instinct pushing him forward but his heart pulling him back. The sound of gunfire mixed with the orders shouted by the mercenaries. Ignoring any warnings, he lifted her into his arms, feeling her leg protest violently at the extra weight. The pain was searing, making his vision blur for an instant. The pilot was already preparing to close the plane door when Viktor, with a last impulse of resistance, threw himself into the aircraft with Kateryna. The metal of the fuselage was struck once again as the door closed behind them. The jet jolted under the force of its engines, tires scraping the asphalt as it gained speed for takeoff. The cars did not give up the chase, accelerating parallel to the plane, shooting without ceasing in a desperate attempt to prevent the escape. The pilot, experienced in extreme situations, maintained firm control, tilting the aircraft's nose in search of altitude. Inside the cabin, Viktor and Kateryna tried to stabilize themselves as the plane shook with the impact of the shots. One of the shots hit something close to the wing, and for a moment, a strange noise filled the fuselage. The jet swayed, throwing passengers against their seats. Viktor held Kateryna tightly, feeling the weight of uncertainty. Events are far from over. What really happened to the plane? Will Viktor and Kateryna finally escape, or will a new obstacle stand in their way? Were they safe now, or did fate still have one more ordeal in store for them before they reached America? The answers are yet to come, and the tension only increases. Every second counts, and the outcome of this escape could be more unpredictable than they ever imagined. Don't miss the next episode and find out what destiny still has in store for them. To ensure you don't miss any details of this intense plot, follow the channel and turn on notifications. This way, you will be notified whenever a new episode is released. Be sure to follow each twist and turning point in this story. If you liked the video, leave a like and comment what you thought of this part of the plot. Share with those who will also enjoy this journey full of action and mystery. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.